Well, let's bring in Canada's Minister of the Environment now. He is Jonathan Wilkinson. He joins me from the foyer of the House of Commons tonight. Mr. Minister, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Not at all.
Let's start with the court ruling in Alberta today. And let me start by getting your reaction to that. We have two courts, Ontario and Saskatchewan, siding with the federal government on the constitutionality of the carbon tax. The Alberta Court of Appeal comes out in a 4-1 ruling today and says, no, Alberta's right. It's unconstitutional. What's your response?
Well, as you pointed out, we've had rulings from both Saskatchewan and Ontario courts that have actually reaffirmed the federal government's jurisdiction here. Today is another step in the process. Ultimately, this will need to be decided at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, I believe, is hearing the Saskatchewan appeal in March. And certainly the Alberta case will be part of the record that will be read into that proceeding. So we look forward to having it decided at the Supreme Court. And I think, the federal government remains confident that this is within our jurisdiction.
Mr. Kenney says today you should immediately remove the federal carbon backstop on the people of Alberta while this makes its way through the court process. What's your answer to that?
Well, look, I think that at the end of the day, what Canadians are looking for is for politicians of all political stripes to take action on climate change. I would tell you that the price on pollution, in our view, is, as a market-based mechanism, is the most efficient way to reduce emissions and to do so in a way that actually addresses affordability.
Right, but the court in Alberta today is suggesting you have no legitimacy to impose that tax on the people of Alberta right now. Well,
I would say we've had two courts that agreed with this. Pollution knows no boundaries. It is, in our view, quite logical, and certainly legally we believe it is within our jurisdiction. Obviously, we would prefer to actually have thoughtful and collaborative conversations with all provinces. I think the Canadians told us that they want climate action in the last campaign. I think the market is telling us very clearly that it wants to see climate action. And I think it's incumbent on politicians of all stripes to actually sit down and figure out how we do that most effectively. I will tell you that the most effective and efficient way to do that is through pricing of pollution.
So that's a no. The carbon tax, federal carbon tax stays in Alberta.
Well, as I say, the Supreme Court is going to be opining relatively shortly, so I think Mr. Kenney and Alberta can certainly make their arguments in the Supreme Court. I'm much more interested in actually talking about how we move forward to address climate change, as I think Canadians expect us all to do.
Let's talk about the decision by Teck Resources to withdraw its application for that big oil sands mine in northern Alberta. I know you faced a big pushback in caucus from MPs opposed to this project. You were supposed to make a decision by the end of this week. So here's what I want to know. Are you happy with the Teck decision not to proceed or disappointed?
Well, I mean, this is a decision that was made by the company. We certainly respect that decision. And I'm sure it wasn't an easy one for the company to make. But I would draw your attention to the letter that the CEO of Teck put out, which really said that they are looking for, and I think players in the energy industry are looking for aggressive action on climate change that enables continued clean growth with respect to our resource sector. And again, I would say that's where we really want to focus. So my job.
But are you happy or disappointed with the fact that this is not going ahead?
My job as Minister of the Environment was to frame up a number of options for Cabinet. Cabinet ultimately would need to make a decision, and once a decision is made, that is the decision on the part of full Cabinet. I was working my way through the process and working in accordance with the law, and so I was made aware of the decision that Teck had taken, but I certainly didn't anticipate it.
What were you going to recommend to Cabinet?
That's a Cabinet confidence, but I would say to you that my job was to essentially frame up a number of options that Cabinet could debate. I was very public in saying that any of the options that were on the table would need to address environmental challenges associated with the project, most specifically some of the greenhouse gas issues. And I will tell you that all of the options that we were framing up would in some measure do that.
In question period today, the government's taking a lot of heat over this Teck decision, suggesting there's a straight line between blockades and what they would describe as confusion in terms of climate policy and application of climate policy and expectations for companies. In your view, why has Teck withdrawn its application? What do you read into that letter?
Well, I read into the letter. I mean, I would actually say that I would, suggest to my colleagues across the way that they actually read the letter that the Teck CEO put out. What he talks about is that the discussion in this country has become far too polarized, that we need to actually get to a point where we are taking aggressive action on climate change in a manner that facilitates continued growth and economic development. And they didn't want to be a football in that conversation. I understand that. And I think that, we need to get to the point where we are having politicians of all political stripes take serious perspectives in terms of acting on climate. Like, this is not a political issue. This is a science issue. I mean, we can pretend that it's not real, but, it is a scientific fact. And I think that, what the company is saying, I think what the CEO of BlackRock and the investment community increasingly are saying is people need to take it seriously.
Yeah, and we've seen evidence of again, so your government is focused, I know, on dealing with the climate crisis and also how to marry that with an improving economy. And a lot of people are concerned that this is now turning into an economic crisis too, because a lot of investors are looking at Canada, looking at what's going on, and will probably look at this court ruling today out of Alberta and go, no thanks. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I think that certainly we are focused on actually enabling continued prosperity and economic growth and opportunity. But the precursor to that with respect to investment in this country is actually taking active and aggressive action on climate change. And that is entirely what we are doing. We've always said that, the environment and the economy and the modern world need to go together, and that is absolutely true. You can bury your head in the sand and pretend that climate change isn't real. That is not going to get you anywhere except a declining economy and a declining environment. It makes no sense.
All right, Minister Wilkinson, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.